1, 2. Mic check 1, 2. Microphone check 1, 2. Mic check 1, 2. All right. I was waiting on a bing sound. I didn't get a bing sound, but that's okay. I thank everyone for tuning in. It's Jamil Salib of me out of Manning, South Carolina. Yes, this is my actual hair. I decided to let it kind of hang out today, tonight. As promised, I would be on with some very important information about Briggs versus Elliott and why we must remember and celebrate the case of Briggs versus Elliott, which later on joined on to 5 other cases for integration of the school system, and eventually turned into Browns versus the Board of Education. So I want to talk to address that a little bit today. But first, I want to start with this. Uh, I am a Christian. I am a Muslim. I am of anything that connects us with God. I don't need anyone's approval, and neither do you, to celebrate and be proud of what you have become, to be grateful to God for what you have become, for all of the journeys that He's brought you and I through. You don't need a preacher or a pastor's permission to celebrate those things. I am all of those things and then some, and I'm grateful to God every day that He allows me to awaken and think of something of value for our children. Now, this is a word that I will not be able to say, because if I say it, they're going to cut me off. And I hope it's not backward, but I will hold this up when I'm mentioning this in this short broadcast today. I thank all of you for tuning in. Uh, I want to say this at the outstart, though, that our main problem now with us and our children is that, unfortunately, we did not heed the warning of biblical texts when it talks about money being the root of all evil. Although we need the money, we must respect the money, but we can't sell out our history for the money, and we can't stop teaching our children of their past out of fear of not being able to provide for them, because our children are going into the future with no connection to anything. We've already been taken from our homeland. Our homeland has already rejected us as a part of them. We come to this country and we make a history starting from being kidnapped and enslaved, brutally beaten, murdered, and then some. And then we want our children to forget that part of the people who destroyed us, because now those people say it's better for us to give them a little something so that they won't rebel against us. As it says in biblical text, come, let us deal wisely with them, lest they join unto an enemy of ours and come against us. That's wisdom. That's our former slave masters playing chess with our lives and the lives of our children. So they give us nearness to them. Now we are allowed to do things that we were once not allowed to do, that we were not even, they had no desire to allow us. They didn't want us a part of their reality. And the moment we fought to get into their reality, we begin to reject and ignore our own reality. So now our children are walking around with no solid identity. They think they're gang members. They think they're politicians. They think they're transgender, homosexuals. They think they're rappers. They think they're sports stars. They think they're everything but a child of God. And so from the very beginning, as I stated before in the book of Revelation, the dragon sits at the foot of the woman waiting to devour the seed. The reason it's so easy to devour the seed is because our children have no connection to anything of value. We help them in their foolishness. We support them in their ignorance, all for $1. Now, I want the dollar because there's so much that we can do with it. But there must be another way to get the dollar besides getting a loan from Satan. So we have Briggs versus the board of, Briggs versus Elliott coming up on May the 20th on Saturday. And my biggest fear is that we'll make this another party and we will ignore the struggle of that period, what that struggle entailed, the suffering that came along with it, and what has prevailed out of that suffering, good and bad. So we're going to get into that today. Give me a minute and we will be right back.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for tuning in to this month installment of the 19 Report. I am your host, Brother Johnny. I walked a thin line between right and wrong, took my fears to God, then I wrote this song. The spirit kept calling, so I answered the phone, and then I manned up and got some backbone. My mind resonates at a much higher tone, solid foundation, empire zone. 3 mountains, I'm in one, right to left counted, 9 and then 1, left to right switch it, 1 and then 9, west to east, south to north, a thin line. I know Christ exists, cause his mercy allows me a chance to stand 3 on a square. Yeah, we in there. This is Brother Johnny of Groove 19 Promotions.
All right, I want to thank you all for tuning in. Again, this is a short segment about Clarendon County history. Again, this is a history that unfortunately a bunch of the Caucasians want to hide, want to forget about, and then we have a bunch of black folks who want to do the same thing. I've noticed throughout history that the only people that have to compromise and lose the respect of their children and lose the respect of their people is us. We always got to compromise to get along with someone else's reality. And unfortunately, most of us are so, we have such low self-esteem of ourselves and our people that it's not very difficult to get us to not want to be a part of something that pertains to us. This is not racism. This is reality. This is where we are, but this is what people don't want talked about because we have a generation of warriors who don't know what their warrior spirit is for, so they're turning it on each other. Tactical skills, masking up, killing each other. I mean, waiting outside to commit a murder, just doing all of these horrific things, not knowing that their service is needed by God to get us to the next level. If you don't think every other race of people will fight, bleed, and die for their sovereignty, you don't know what war is all about. So I want to talk about Harry and Eliza Briggs, and I hope I'm saying that right, and R.W. Elliott. Just a brief history on it. I'm not going to stay on long with it, but I feel it necessary for someone to hold on to the reality of what we've been through. Although most people don't care what we've been through, you're making the biggest mistake of your life by ignoring your past. Not ignoring all past. We go to the Bible, it's the past, but we skip slavery. When in the Bible, it talks about that same slavery and told us what we were going into today. Know of a surety that thy seed shall be in a land that is not theirs, and shall be afflicted for 400 years. And after that time, I will come. That's talking about you and me and the affliction. Briggs versus Elliott is a part of that affliction, a part of that suffering that our children may participate in, but aren't completely or fully aware of the sacrifices that it took to get them into nice colleges, to get them into the schools that they could graduate from. Life here in Clarendon County, you look at your courthouses and everything downtown in Summerton, the same. Your courthouses were auction blocks where slaves were sold. Ex-Senator John Land's office was the prison, the jail. Downtown Manning, Clarendon County, there was a movie theater that we were not privy to. And if we were allowed to go, we had to sit up in the balcony. Downtown Summerton, they had a movie theater the same. If you went into a store and you were the first person in that store as a black person in Clarendon County, and a white person came behind you, they put you to the side until they took care of all the white folks, gave you what they wanted to give you, and you'd better take it and overcharge you for it. Why Briggs versus Elliott? Harry, and of course this began prior to that, but in Clarendon County in Summerton, Harry and his wife, I think Harry was working at a gas station, and you can check the history and correct me if I'm wrong, and his wife was working at a hotel, getting, of course, minimum wages, and our children could only go up to like the 6th grade in school and could only get to school by walking 2, 3, 4, 5 miles to school. Now, some of the parents tried to put together to get a bus, but the bus was all, broken down and we couldn't afford the maintenance on the bus. And so it was a difficult time for us in that regard. There were petitions being signed that the Clarendon County school system should provide buses for our children to ride to school. All we wanted at the time were the buses. So Harry and Eliza Briggs were the first two, along with Mr. Delaney, and I think Mr. Delaney was a principal at one of the schools, to sign the petition for bus service. And that petition warped into wanting better books, better schools, better curriculums, that we could compete, our children could compete in the real world for positions. Mr. Briggs and his wife, after signing the petition, lost their jobs right there in Summerton, received death threats from the Ku Klux Klan. I wanted to show this again. This is where we are. This is what we're teaching tonight. I can't say it because the last time I said it, they locked me out. Received death threats from violent white groups. I want to read this real quickly. Life was difficult for the African Americans living in Clarendon County. The blacks and the whites lived two very separate lives. Everything was separated from schools to drinking fountains. The government in Clarendon County had paid about $150 for every white student for school and $43 for every black student. The blacks had school only up until the 6th grade. So when parents today are pushing their children for school, our people fought for you to participate and receive the best education to move forward in life for your people and then for everyone else. White folks know for a fact that self-preservation is first, and trust and believe. No matter how much you loving and hugging on them, self-preservation is first, and ain't nothing wrong with that. This is not a racist rant. We're talking about the purpose for Briggs versus the Board of Education, the celebration coming up Saturday. It's okay to talk black now. You know, Juneteenth has been declared a national holiday, so all of the scared people can now come out with all of their, you can bring your African gear out, not only for Black History Month, but now you can bring it out in June. But as long as someone else is fighting your battles for you, you will never reap the vibrational benefits, the spiritual and universal vibrational benefits of that fight. You can't get the reward from that fight if you're not fighting. And ignorance is not an excuse for not fighting, because the knowledge is readily available if we want it, but we don't want it. So I look around and I see how blissful ignorance is. We spend our money, we live good. Our children happen to get through the system and get a job in the system, but can never come back and do what is necessary to build a society for our people. No black banks, black grocery stores, black what do you call them? Urgent cares, black drug facilities, only a bunch of black churches teaching about a Caucasian Christ. And if you talk black in that church, you're considered a hater. Well, Briggs versus the board, $43, and we only went up to the 6th grade. Then we had to go back into the fields. Everything made it very hard for us to succeed in the future. And this is where we are. You want to know why our children are the way they are. They really believe that our past started with killing each other, with murdering each other, with violence, because that's the story that is constantly repeated repetitively on the internet. Death, killing, murder. I did this, I did that, but never we sacrifice to build nothing. Not that it's not going on, it is. But our children don't see it and don't care about it. They believe they're going to be superstars in a world that they don't control. From your Kanye Wests to your bottom of the barrel hip hop artists and singers, they are controlled by white dollars. So the majority of joy and laughter that you see in our people is a lie. This is what we're talking about right now. Briggs versus Elliott in Clarendon County. These conditions were very dangerous that some children even drowned walking to school. Our children had to walk through water, and some of them drowned in Clarendon County, drowned trying to get to school and fighting for proper roads and buses and schools. And the system is saying no. R.W. Elliott, let me put his picture back up here for you. This is the case. Briggs versus Elliott. Briggs, Harry and Eliza Briggs and R.W. Elliott said that the reason they would not provide buses and better schools for black children is because we didn't pay enough taxes. Here we are, sharecropping, borrowing money and farming on white folks' land after physical slavery, sharecropping, and taking a percentage of the crops we got to keep from our labor, and then take those crops, the corn, the tobacco, the cotton, to the market, and then the man at the market says, "Thanks, Necker, thank you, but you get no money because you farmed on my land and you used my tractor and we supplied you with all these supplies. In fact, you owe us money." This is what was happening in Clarendon County. This is what sparked the Briggs versus Elliott signing the petition, Briggs signing the petition so that our children wouldn't have to risk dying trying to make it to school to learn in order to compete in a world that was against them from the beginning. They didn't want you in their school system. I know this is difficult, but let me tell you something that I know for a fact about God and Jesus and any other universal law system that we talk about. If you don't tell the truth about what was, it has to be repeated. The Bible is a book of repetitiveness. The same thing happening over and over again until it was decided that the people are not going to listen. Now, since the school board did not fund any money for African American kids, the county had small wooden buildings that they called schools. The whites, however, had many large, beautiful schools with their own science buildings and lunch areas. The African American schools did not even have running water or electricity. Now, I rented a place from Rosetta Blanding, a school teacher during that period. And she would always tell me about how things were back then, that they had to come in and light the wood and, and all of these segregated schools, all of these black schools, you can find them in the woods in places like Pinewood, Davis Station, going out there towards the war, what do you call the place? Going out towards Santee. I did a whole video on wanting to purchase the land and the building of the old Jordan School, and all of the Jordan alumni who you will see in pictures and smiling and loving up on somebody else. Nobody put up a dime to try to save the school, because the minute you give us access to what Caucasians have, we give away our life. We give away our children's future. And then we ask the question, why are things so difficult for us? So, Briggs, of course, one of 5 cases combined into Brown versus the Board of Education. The Briggs case was named for Harry Briggs, one of 20 parents who brought suit against R.W. Elliott, the president of the school board for Clarendon County, South Carolina. Initially, parents had only asked the county to provide school buses for the black students, as they did for whites. When their petitions were ignored, they filed a suit challenging segregation itself. Reverend J.A. Delaney, a school principal, was instrumental in recruiting the parents, plaintiffs, and enlisting the help of the NAACP. Thurgood Marshall lead counsel for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund Incorporated, and Harold Boulware, a local lawyer, filed Briggs versus Elliott in the fall of 1950. Now, I want to make this very clear. It wasn't just black folks fighting for this. White folks were in the fight for segregation as well, for desegregation as well. And if not for desegregation, at least that blacks would get fair treatment in their own area. Give them the buses, give them the resources, give them the schools. But most of the time, we're the ones who beg to be included into somebody else's reality, instead of accepting the gift of getting the same materials. And Miss Rosetta Blanding would talk about how studious, how well she taught the students. Every time I went to one of her birthday parties, all of her students were there, if they could be there. Her daughter went on to drive bus and do things like that. A third judge panel at the U.S. District Court was presented with substantial psychological evidence and expert testimony presented on African-American school conditions. Do you all remember the psychological tests that the little boy was in the room and they had a white doll and a black doll, and they asked who was the best doll or the prettiest doll or the most likely to succeed, and all of the children chose the white doll? That was a part of the scientific psychological process that went into the case of Briggs versus Elliott, later formed into Brown versus the Board of Education for desegregation of schools, for desegregating schools, those were the proof positive that we were losing mentally because white folks had better things. We thought they were better, and they thought so too, and still think so, and we still think so. The court denied the plaintiff's request to abolish school segregation. Instead, they ordered the school board to begin equalizing, or the equalization of the schools. In a lone dissenting opinion, Judge Julius Warren adamantly opposed segregation in public education. Facing retaliation from irate segregationists, Warren left the state soon after. J.A. Delaney and Harry Briggs also lost their jobs as a result of their involvement with the case. So everybody that got involved with the Briggs versus the Board of Education either lost their jobs or lost their lives. This is where we are. These are the people, and some of them are your family members that you don't know nothing about. Briggs are all throughout Clarendon County, the Briggs family. Delane. You can look at these people, and for Instagram, I apologize, but you can go on the Facebook page at the 19 Report and see the pictures, or just type in Briggs versus Elliot. All of the names are there. The Flood family, the Gibsons, Maxine, Annie Gibson, the Bennett family, the Gilbert Henry family, the Parson family, the Reagan family, more Briggs, more Delanes, Georgia, Richardsons, the Pearson family, the Richburg family, more Briggs, the Seals family. All of these people were related, fighting with courage just to get their children a better education. This is an example of the schools that our children, no windows, board schools. Spring Hill Elementary School was originally a Mason Lodge. Teachers Maddie Belton Delane and Helen Richburg accompanied their students. Joseph A. Delane Papers, South Carolina Library, University of South Carolina. Old pictures of the struggle of our parents and grandparents to get us a better life. You can see the names that were signed, and all of these people as their name, and mostly you see Bennett's, Johnsons, Browns. I guess that's why I be loving the Browns so much. I used to live across the street from the Browns. Reagans, Olivers, and some of the Olivers had a restaurant in Summerton for a while. Richburgs and Richardsons, Lasanes, the Lawsons, these people sacrificed it all, life and everything, so that our children can graduate from colleges now. But you were supposed to graduate from them colleges and come back and help your people, but you graduated from the colleges, most of you, and forgot your people. You forgot. You got educated, and you look down on your own people. NAACP officers J.W. Seals, Boyd E. Richburg, Joseph Delane, and members who fought, man. Thurgood Marshall, who came all the way from New York to fight the case. This is the picture I wanted to get you to. This is a picture of Mr. Delane Sr., Maddie Delane and their children, Joseph A. Jr., Ophelia, and Brumit, looking at their burned down home. Their home was burned down because of their involvement in trying to get children, getting the schools desegregated and getting our children the best education they could get. To have our children today not care about school or drop out of school. And it's all based upon our disconnect from the struggle. Finally, on May 17th, 1954, the Supreme Court spoke. We conclude, quote, we conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. But this was not the end. The court wanted to hear arguments in its next term about how and when, on May 31st, 1955, in its second ruling, known as Brown 2, the Supreme Court left implementation vague, giving local authorities primarily responsibilities to admit plaintiffs to public schools with all deliberate speed. The 1955-56 school year began with armed white men guarding Summerton still segregated schools. Armed white men guarding Summerton segregated schools. Armed white men who wanted to protect what they perceived to be either stopping the black students from coming in or protecting the black students coming in. White citizen councils formed throughout the state. More than 40,000 white men organized to pick off desegregated petitioners through economic reprisal and other forms of repression and intimidation. Governor George Bell Timmerman Jr. signed legislation that prohibited hiring and required that firing of any city council or state employee belonging to the NAACP. That is why our elected officials, some of them, are so terrified to stand up for anything of value. And if I'm not talking about you, don't respond. We get our positions, we get afraid, we get quiet, and we watch our children descend into hell and do nothing to help them. The KKK threatened Reverend Richburg with an abduction and whipping. He was fired from a teaching job, and 5 relatives were fired from their jobs at schools and at cotton gins. Vendors again stopped supplying black-owned businesses when suppliers demanded Mary Oliver removed her name. She told them never and invoked her husband. I promised him that I'd be a woman. They asked her to remove her name or she would be fired. She said, I can't do that. I promised my husband and I would remain solid, and I will. Delane, whose bishop had transferred him to Lake City, escaped Florence County in a high-speed chase. After the KKK operation shot him up, focused on his family. On October 5th, his church, St. James AME, burned down. On October 7th, a KKK signed missive threatened, we have made plans to move you if it takes dynamite to do it. On October 10th, their home under a barrage of gunfire. Wife Maddie Delane escaped to a neighbor while Delane shot back to mark an assailant's car, dashed to his own car, and fled. Upon reaching New York, they shot up the man's house, all because they didn't want to be in a school with us. Why I don't want this event to be a party, and why I would take offense to any white person saying that we shouldn't bring up this. It must be brought up. Bring that back to your attention. I can't say it. It must be brought up. Brown versus the Board of Education. You got to know what it was all about. I mean, Briggs versus Elliott, which led to Brown versus the Board, which was one of the 5 cases combined with the Brown versus the Board of Education. You must understand, Delane and his family were terrorized. Their home was burned down. They shot up his home like y'all shooting up each other's houses now. Y'all ain't the originators of that. He shot back. This is in the American experience. This is in a special on PBS. Don't get scared. Don't get afraid that I'm saying something that's out of pocket. It's on regular TV, public TV, PBS. With Bill and Melinda Gates backs PBS. All of the elite back PBS. And they put shows like this on there because they know we're not going to look at it. But when the time comes when they're questioned, they'll say, we put it out there. But them neckers don't care about nothing. So Delane shot back to Mark and assailant's car, dashed to his own car and fled. Upon reaching New York, the man left and kept riding until he got to New York. Upon reaching New York, Delane surrendered to authorities and took refuge in the home of AME Bishop D. Ward Nichols, who told Governor Averill Harriman that Delane faced almost certain chain gang conviction and death at the hands of his enemies. See, these white folks, they don't forget some of them. The WCC, which is nothing more or less than the Ku Klux Klan reborn, New York refused to extradite Delane, indicted for assault with a deadly weapon. He was shooting back in 1958 and twice in 1959. Parents asked again unsuccessfully for desegregation, and then for black students reassignments to all white schools in 1965. 5 black students enrolled in Summerton High School under court order. In 1965, only 5 black students enrolled in Summerton High School under court order. I want you to see what is today, but what it came from. And I would love for your heart to be in wanting to know, because the sacrifices of people like Harriet and Eliza Briggs, Mr. Delane, Thurgood Marshall, and all those in between, there were white people involved too. I have a book written by James Clyburn, Uncommon Courage, but I don't know what I did with the book. I got to find it because I want to use it. But in 1965, black students enrolled in Summerton High School. Under court order in 1966, Rita Mae McDonald graduated, the first black student to do so. Rita Mae McDonald, but only after Father John E. McDonald and the NAACP called in the Justice Department to stop student harassments and teacher plots failed her. Henry McDonald, who owned his own home and land to farm, signed one of the many desegregation petitions of the 1950s. He lost all credit and had to travel for farm supplies or pay cash. When the White Citizen Council ratcheted up retaliations, he drove repeatedly to Washington, D.C. and New York City to pick up and deliver food and clothing donations. Like the other petitioners who had added perseverance to courage, he stayed with it through the suffering, said daughter Shirley. He said it was time and he was going to take a stand. It was time and it was right. They took the stand. Now, the woman who wrote this is Claudia Smith Brinson, the author of the Stories of the Struggle, the Clash over Civil Rights in South Carolina, and her white woman. So she said it. I'm just repeating it. Don't get all caught up in the race thing. I want to close with this. And I pray that I'm saying this correctly. I don't want to misquote it. I'm kind of nervous about that. Let me look. Let me look it up first, and then we'll close. Yeah, let me look that up first, because I had the book, but I want to say this, and I don't want to quote it, so don't quote me on it. There are many documentaries on YouTube where the children of Briggs versus Elliott case and Brown versus the Board of Education are telling their story, and no one can tell it like they can tell it. I certainly can't. I encourage us to go and look at those documentaries, just well worth it. And you may not believe this, but I tried on several years ago on several occasions to purchase one of the old schools in Jordan. The Caucasian man was willing to sell it for $30,000. It still has the school in the woods, like most of them. The frame of the school is still there. And I thought we could take the land, which is very fertile land, plant on it, and also make the old school a museum where the children could come and see the history of their families and what they struggled through. But because of this, not because Caucasians are fighting it, but because our people want to erase our history so that they don't risk losing anything, any favor, any position with who they perceive as their friends. But that high school up there in Clarendon County, Manning High School, the old one, which is now the I can't ever remember the name of the place. They're trying to revamp it now. Weldon Auditorium. They didn't want us in that place. And those who were over it didn't just fight in courts, but they are part of the lynch mob and the killers and the murderers. The original posses that came and shot up homes to keep us out of that place. I know that for a fact. God sent that to me in a vision. And a year later, someone called me from upstate New York to tell me the whole story about the Weldon Auditorium in the old Manning High School. I'm not going to bring up the old stuff. But I will say that you'll never be able to bury the history. So and I will say this, Clarendon County contributed some monies for the Briggs versus Elliott celebration, which is a good thing, so that it can be conducted with some form of professionalism. It's not my place to say how much, but some monies. And it is greatly appreciated. And whites nor blacks should have issue with teaching this history, because there is a museum downtown in Manning across from the courthouse, across from Bob's Alignment, right in front of the gym back there, and right next to the bank, there's a white building that has the history of Briggs versus Elliott in that museum. I did a documentary in that museum with the owners and the contributors, white folks. And we sat down and we talked about everything in that museum from Clarendon County. So the Briggs versus Elliott, why we must remember, is because all of the sacrifices that and the elders are dying off, and no one is keeping the history alive. They just put a monument up in Summerton, near the old Summerton school, commemorating the Briggs versus Elliott case. And also at the State House in Columbia, there's a big wall that you can take a tour. And the Briggs versus Elliott is mentioned there. And there are many different landmarks in Summerton. We pass by them every day. So in closing, it was either Delane or it was, and Lord have mercy, forgive me for not having that book, but it was either Delane, because I know Delane had to go to New York, or it was Briggs on their deathbed, knowing that they were about to die in New York. They called Clarendon County to ask permission to return to Clarendon County, to die in Clarendon County and be buried where they struggled. They were denied. They were denied the right to come back to Clarendon County and be buried. That shows you the level of hatred and remembrance. People don't forget. And that's when they started to, they had a Christian school right here at the light in Manning with the church across the street, and all of those were segregated. Now they're trying to segregate them. Now they're trying to desegregate them. They had Clarendon Hall, and then they had the other private school where they are letting a few people in. But they did all of this because of the Briggs versus Elliott. If the Neckar's going to be in the school, we don't want to be there. So if there are Caucasians who see the errors in their ways or the errors in their parents' ways, an apology is not enough. We need the keys to open the doors to the paradise that you all live in. Not just for a few, that best of, for all. Because a man of God knows that until all people are free, they're not free. A man of ego believes that because I'm free, to heck with everybody else. And that's what is still happening. So the dark cloud of ignorance and hatred is still over the South and still over Clarendon County. Look at all the churches, all the separation, all the different organizations in the separation. We are the reason this is so relevant, because we don't teach our children. I can't say this on the air because they'll stop my feed. But this is where we are. We must do better. So, in closing, those who fought that we would be able to get into schools and colleges and pledge into fraternities and sororities, those are Greek letters. Black Greeks like that. Prince Hall, the Masons. Another story. But R.W. Elliott, in closing, when the weather is good, Robert and Carrie George hitched their 2 mules to their wagon, called on their 6 children, and ride from Friendship to St. Paul Township. Normal, firstborn, hates, natural return, blah, blah. Okay. When the weather was bad, Levi Pearson started up his pickup for the children. And they walked 9 miles one way to Scotch Branch in Summerton. 9 miles. Children had to walk. So that's 18 miles. How long does it take you to get to school? How are you when you get to school? Then you got to walk back home, get in the fields, get your schoolwork done. Before long, you end up leaving school altogether. This is why Levi Pearson puts boards across the back of his truck to get children to school. These people sacrificed, man. Sacrificed. And this is why we do the Briggs versus Elliott. This is my first year participating. And I had a discussion with some people in the positions, and I said, well, if it's not something local and the people locally aren't benefiting, then I can't be a part of it. I'm grateful for what's going on in the cities all over the place, but we're talking about right here in Clarendon County, and we're not trying to brush up against white folks or whatever they feel, because they're too powerful. There is no neckers with their guns and violence that can go up against white folk. No. So I thank all of you for tuning in. As always, I ask you for an hour. It's 48 minutes in. May 20th, Summerton, South Carolina, Briggs versus Elliott Spring Celebration and Remembrance Day. We're going to have vendors out. As always, this is the 50th anniversary of the Briggs versus Elliott, if I'm not mistaken. You can get a vendor spot for $25. We have a parade you can enter for free. We have a car show, bike show. We're going to have food available. We're going to have music available. And it's not going to be, I left home to be with my side piece. It's not going to be One Monkey Don't Stop No Show. It's not going to be that. All of that. King George and all that. That's for another time. It's going to be a lot of uplifting music, a lot of, old school music. But we're going to have a good time, God willing. Whites and blacks. I didn't tell you any of this information to rile you up. Just calm yourself down. Blacks are blacks' problem now. We got the ability and the opportunity and the capability to do whatever we want. The only thing with us is that most people want to be the ones to shine the brightest. That's why there's always a best of something. All right. Thank y'all for tuning in. Remember, study. Everything that I gave you today came right off of PBS. Remember the Briggs family, their sacrifice, the loss. Remember Mr. Delane and Harry Briggs. He was a principal. He lost his job. Harry lost his job. All trying to get into schools. And the minute we were allowed into schools, we lost part of our teaching staff. They became teachers' aides. And we also lost our old schools, which are now in shambles in the woods. You can see them in the woods all throughout Clarendon County. And I went to the historical, the old library, which is the historical center, to ask how we could make these places historical landmarks so that they won't be torn down. And that didn't work. So, and my people didn't help at all. And I realized that we are just terrified to try to fight for anything. And I understand that. White folks put the fear of their God and their wickedness in us long time ago. And it's there, and it'll stay there until God removes it. So I wanted to show this monument. And then there's another monument also that's been placed in Summerton. Thanks to a lot of people. I don't want to mention any names. But it says in quote, "Together let us sweetly live, distinguished followers of justice. Briggs versus Elliott, Reverend Joseph A. Delane, Mr. Hammett Pearson, Mr. Harry Briggs, Mr. Levi Pearson, Mr. Joseph Lemon, pioneers in the school desegregation case, historical plaintiffs that led to the Supreme Court desegregation of all public schools, Briggs versus the Board of Education, 1954. Benny Pearson, Edward Reagan, William Reagan, Lucretha Richardson, Lee Richardson, James H. Bennett, Mary Oliver, Willie M. Stoops. And it got all their names on there. And it was presented by Clarendon County. So I wanted to put that out there because I know y'all don't like click on my videos, but y'all watch them like on the slide, and that's fine. Watch them on the slide. But it's a shame that in 2023, you're cowardly in your spirit for your own people, and you watch your own people die trying to get along with other people when they would respect you more for being who you are. But instead, you hide behind masks, blue hair, blonde hair, green hair, purple eyes, all this makeup, but you never stand up for yourself and your people. It's sad. And you get no credit from God for other people fighting your battles and you not standing up for yourself and your people. That's why we suffer for so long. So thank you on Instagram for tuning in. Thank those of you who may have joined and kind of clicked off real quick. Y'all are something else. Thank you on Facebook as well. You join, you click off real quick. You're something else. But if it was some shot and shooting video or somebody twerking or something, that's why sex is going to kill most of us. Because we love it so much. It's going to kill us. But I would rather die on duty. And I hope that many of us will do that as well. Thank you for tuning in. Jamil Salib Zamir. Hope to see y'all on May 20th in Summerton, South Carolina. It's going to be a pleasant time, I believe. And we'll be talking some more on this topic right here very soon. I can't say it, but we'll be talking about it. Thank you for tuning in, Jamil Salib Zamir.